Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Steve Aldana. I'm the CEO of WellSteps. I wanted to welcome you to today's webinar, Health Contingent Wellness Programs Done Right. And our presenter will be Dr. Troy Adams. Before we jump into that and some of the logistics about today's webinar, I just wanted to highlight what happened in 2013 when the New York Times reported about the Health Contingent program being done at Penn State University. Penn State has 40,000 employees, and at that time their annual healthcare spend was $217 million. Facing increases, dramatic increases every year, they decided to do something serious about it and really start to engage in employee wellness. So they implemented an incentive system based on a health contingent program where they basically said that if you don't do a biometric screening, don't do your health risk appraisal, and if you don't do a preventative physical exam once a year, it's going to cost you $100 a month. So it was a surcharge. So in other words, fail to participate and it's going to cost you $100 a month. Well, this type of stick approach to this wellness program was approved initially, but there was a lot of very vocal voices within the university who fought back. Concerns about privacy, concerns about questions that were done on the health risk appraisal, such as, are you planning to get pregnant in the last 12 months, next 12 months? So there's a lot of media coverage. In fact, the New York Times, several big papers did a big expose on the whole program. Well, that's where they started that off. And I hadn't followed along the way. So this last week, I actually contacted Cassandra Kitko, who's the Director of Benefits at PSU, to say, where are we at? What happened with this? Well, shortly after it came out, it was implemented for a little while. They switched it from a surcharge of $100 a month to, if you do these things, we'll give you $100. So they backed off from the amount. It became a carrot instead of a stick. But here's the rest of the story that most people don't know. While it was a stick, and while it was a $100 a month surcharge, and some of the people were very vocal, according to Cassandra's effort as again within the benefits department at PSU, 80% of the 40,000 employees completed their screenings. 55% did their health risk appraisal, and another 50% did their preventative screenings. So even though it was a stick approach, and it probably could have been better had it been a carrot approach, they still got a lot of compliance. And her comment to me was, we've got a lot of really good data to work with here, which seems to me like a lot of hard work just to get some good data. I would have been happier if they had really focused on some behavior change kinds of things to move this along, all in an attempt to improve their healthcare trend. Well, now we've got the EEOC, which has come with some new rules. There's some legal aspects to this, and it's in a state of flux, and we wanted to just update all of this for you and point out to you what's working, what's the correct way to approach, what are some case studies of how this happened. So welcome to today's webinar. We have over 700 people who registered for the webinar today. The slides that are going to be shown by Dr. Adams can be found at the WellSteps webinars page. Troy, if you want to hit that next slide. We can see on the webinars page, or go to our home page and just go to webinars, and you can actually download today's slides and a handout that Troy's prepared for this. All of your phones and all of your microphones have been muted, so you won't be able to talk. But in your control panel on the right side of your screen, you can click on the Questions tab, and you can type a question at any time about any part of this. Ryan Isaacson and myself will be behind the scenes going through your questions carefully, and we'll have some time at the end for that. With this, let me introduce Dr. Troy Adams. He's my partner at WellSteps. A lot of companies form partnerships, and the partners tend to blow up after a few years, but not Troy and I. We get along just great. His yang is my yin, and we get along great. He's the Chief Operations Officer. He got his PhD at the University of Texas at Austin. He's been publishing research, he's been consulting, he's been involved in this his entire career. Few people know this as well as Troy Adams, and I would consider him one of the best experts in the country on how this all works. That layered on the fact that he's getting to be a technology genius on the programming side of how it all goes together. So it's a pleasure to have Troy as a partner. It's a pleasure to hear from him for a few minutes, and I'll turn the time over to him.
Thank you, Steve. And thanks for leading with an example of how to do health contingent programs the wrong way. And for sharing the rest of the story. I don't think a lot of the people on the webinar today have heard the rest of the story. So thanks for that. Just wanted to let you know that Steve and I have been doing these webinars for quite a while. We take them really seriously. We prepare, we research like crazy because we want to make sure that you get the best possible content. And so what I did in my preparation is I searched the National Library of Medicine for evidence on the impact of health contingent or outcomes-based wellness programs, as they used to be called, the impact on employee health. And I have to say, I was pretty thorough, spent quite a bit of time, and you'll be disappointed to know that I did not find one database research article, which just means that this whole thing is really, really new. In fact, it's so new that the rules are still being made as we speak. Some of you may know that the EEOC time for open comments on the proposed rules expired in June. The final rules have not been announced. My guess is they probably won't even be the final rules once they get announced. But already, as Steve mentioned, one example, there have been some pretty spectacular public relations fails, which could be easily prevented with a proper secret sauce. So we can learn from this. We'll march forward and we'll learn a lot, and that's hopefully what we'll do in this webinar today. I think as you listen to this webinar, you will find it very helpful if you think of employees as teenagers. You remember what it was like to be a teenager? You know, teenagers, they don't like being told what to do, and they especially don't like having privileges taken away. One of their least favorite words is grounded. They hate it. I know. I still have a teenager, so I'm kind of in this game. What this suggests is that the carrot approach is a much happier option than the stick approach, as Steve so aptly illustrated. So let's dive right in. We've already showed you how to get the slides. Here are the objectives for the webinar today. We want to talk about how and when not to do health contingent programs, really briefly. Just a word about false dichotomies. We'll get to that in a minute. Health contingent 101. I know that some of you are maybe new to this area. Some of you are more seasoned, but so please be patient with me if you're more seasoned. We've got to catch everybody up to speed. We just need a little review. Why all of this matters in the grand scheme, and then a case study of an effective health contingent program. One who's a WellSteps customer who did a fantastic job doing all this and the way they did it and the way they communicated it. And then finally, I'll close with the secret sauce of health contingent programs, what we have put together uh, based on our review of kind of what else is going on out there that we think will really get this done right. So those are the objectives today. All right, so how to do health contingent wrong. As Steve illustrated, in the one case that he mentioned, maybe health contingent was done wrong, and I think in some cases health contingent should never be tried at all. I'll get to that in a minute. But here are several ways you can do this wrong. Now, what I'm saying is don't do these things. But here's what has happened that has been wrong. So just try to think again. Again, you're a teenager. Imagine how you would respond. Here are some ways not to do this. First of all, you could ramrod the health contingent program down the throat of employees without listening to their input. How many times have we been guilty of that as a parent? Ramrod it down the throat, don't take any input. Employees like to feel like they have input, and they do. We get some of the best ideas that we have at WellSteps from our employees. Secondly, here's another way not to do this. Don't tell employees anything about the program until right before you roll it out. In other words, forget the communication. It's not that important. You know what? Communication is everything. Don't do that. Use a stick-based approach instead of a carrot-based approach. Again, if you look at the Penn State case, they probably did a little of all three of those things. There's no employee input or limited employee input. There was very little communication, if any, and there was a stick-based approach. Now, that's a recipe for disaster right there. And as Steve mentioned, there was a revolt. Here's a fourth thing that how not to do it. Implement a health contingent program, but don't provide any tools or skills to help employees improve health. Oh, and by the way, do nothing to improve the health culture. Think about it. Not providing any tools and skills is a little like requiring an employee to produce a business report without providing a desk, chair, or computer. Here are the rules. You got to meet the rules, but we're not going to help you. So without adequate tools, in this case, business tools, how can employees be held accountable for results? Again, these are things I suggest you not do. Some of the lessons that we've learned from people who've tried this and have failed spectacularly. All right, so when not to do a wellness program. One of my favorite quotes of all time is from a movie, Remember the Titans. In the movie, there's a character named Julius who responds to criticism by a team leader with this quote. He says, "Attitude reflects leadership, Captain." So guess what? The same is true for culture. There is no doubt in my mind that culture reflects leadership. So if this is a predominant leadership style in your organization or in the organization with whom you work, this is when not to do a health contingent program. You'll find with a leadership style like this, employees will be unhappy, they'll be angry, or they might be like this guy who built a paper bomb shelter to protect him from leadership stink bombs. If you watch the show The Office, you recognize this guy. And it doesn't have to be anger. It could be a leadership style that features belittlement, bullying, disrespect. You get the idea. Bottom line, if the culture of an organization is negative, toxic, or really non-supportive toward health initiatives, then maybe the cultural soil is not ready for a health contingent wellness program yet. Maybe it needs a little bit of cultivation. So the culture needs to be prepared with some organizational development or similar first before it's ready. So I hope you hear what I'm saying. I'm not saying that a health contingent program is a bad idea. I'm just saying maybe it comes in a hierarchical flow that one thing needs to happen first, which is the development of the organization to the extent possible. So I know this is hard doctrine, but both Steve and I have seen the negative cultures kill too many really good programs in our consulting career. So I would say the good news is that fortunately not many organizations are not this extreme, but you get the idea. So this is when not to do it, when the culture is overwhelmingly negative. Okay, so just a little FYI about the critics. Critics preach a false dichotomy. Now, Steve, in our June webinar, he summoned the spirit of Anton Ego, the iconic critic from the movie Ratatouille. And I think the shoe fits great. So there are critics that preach a false dichotomy. What's that? Well, they say the program must be one way or the other way. There's no in between, right? So you might hear, if running your business becomes a challenge, do you want workers who have good cardiovascular fitness or who are resilient? And that's supposed to make you think, oh, gee, I have to pick one or the other. I think resilience is really, really important. So forget the cardiovascular fitness. That's the whole purpose of the false dichotomy. Or think about it. That's like saying, do you want apple or pumpkin pie at Thanksgiving? I mean, come on, man. The answer my father used to give was, yes, I want both. That's an okay answer. There's always a third alternative. So for us, it's okay to say, I want my employees to be physically and mentally healthy. Think about it. Why would anyone settle for one or the other? It makes no sense. Just case in point, I was in Austin, Texas about a bazillion years ago getting my PhD. And 3M, the company that behind the sticky note, they came to the University of Texas faculty in my department, and they asked for proposals to help them with their wellness program. So there were a lot of proposals that featured things like fitness testing, body fat testing for all employees, and that was the origin of how we were going to help everyone improve their health. My mentor, Dr. Mary Steinhardt, also submitted a proposal, and she thought she didn't have much of a chance to get it. In it, she basically asked a few questions. She said, isn't 3M the company built on creativity and innovation? So how will body fat testing help employees be more productive in this environment? Wouldn't employees be better served in the short term, just to kind of get things going, by a program designed to help them build resilience, basically? So maybe there are participants in this webinar who feel the same way, but it doesn't have to be either or. I will admit we were in her proposal. She was a little bit either or. So what did 3M do? Well, they quickly understood that their business model did require them to focus first on mental health, so they did. But within a very short period of time, the wellness program personnel wound up also identifying how important physical health was. And so they were better and more successful because they did both. Moral of the story, don't buy the false dichotomies that the critics are selling because it's baloney. All right, so here's a little bit of Health Contingent 101. Again, apologies in advance if you already know this stuff. We just need a refresher. So currently, if you're an unsafe driver, you pay higher rates for car insurance. If you do unsafe things like base jumping, for example, you pay higher rates for life insurance. We currently don't do this in health insurance. In fact, it's against the law. But a health contingent program is a step in that direction within certain rules, because those who maintain their health get a better deal on health insurance. Basically, that's the whole idea. So a health contingent program is a jump through your hoop, a wellness hoop, to get a better deal on health insurance kind of program, which nearly always means lower premiums, copays, or deductibles. That's pretty much what everybody uses in terms of plan design. So jumping through the hoop obviously represents just doing the things required to get the better deal. And you heard Steve list the things that had to be done at Penn State in order to qualify for the better deal. In that case, in order to avoid the penalty. It can be one thing, it can be multiple things. We'll go over some of those things in just a bit. So by way of background, wellness program guidelines were included in the Affordable Care Act. Most of us got familiar with those, we got comfortable with those, and then all of a sudden, whoom, out of nowhere, the EEOC surprised everybody by filing 3 lawsuits against wellness programs, claiming that these programs were in violation of the American with Disabilities Act and some other federal laws, just to keep things simple. So 2 of these suits were against companies that required employees to pay 100%. That's a lot. 100% of the healthcare bill, unless they participated in a wellness program. And the third suit was against a company that gave non-participating employees a very large bill, about $2,000 for their annual healthcare spend. So these lawsuits have led to some recent modification to rules set forth by the Affordable Care Act. Actually, there are modifications that have been suggested by the EEOC to kind of align the Affordable Care Act and the EEOC in a number of ways. So there are what I've done is I've combined all of the rules, and I've tried to include them in as simple as possible form to just kind of summarize them really quickly. Unfortunately, there are 10, so let me just go through these really fast. First of all, they say a reward is either an incentive or a penalty, so they just use the word reward. Second of all, participatory program, according to the modifications, where there's no reward given or the reward is not based on meeting a health factor. Now, health factor is one of 8 different things, which includes biometric values, but there are 8 additional things. If you're really interested to know what those 8 things are, you can Google it up, or I'm happy to send those to you. So an activity-only program, the employee has to do an activity related to a health factor to obtain a reward. So in other words, the numbers don't matter, but an activity-only program, maybe the requirement is you go and you get your blood pressure measured. And that's it. That's a requirement. There's got to be evidence that you showed up and did that. And in a health contingent program, which is what we're talking about today, employee must meet a health standard, a health factor, like stopping smoking or achieving a specific biometric number. So the EEOC has proposed rules for health contingent programs that aren't final. I think the final version will probably be pretty close, if not identical, to the proposed rules. So these are all, again, combined. So here we go. 1, 2, and 3. Apply to programs, health contingent rules apply to programs that are part of a group health plan. In a lawsuit against Broward County, the judge ruled for the defendant, Broward County. He said the county wellness program was part of a group health plan since it was communicated and marketed in a health plan brochure. the same principle would apply if any type of benefits-based incentives was used, such as lower premium or copays. I don't know, but I'm not a legal expert in this area, but I think that would make it part of the group health plan. So you might be asking, what about programs that aren't clearly part of the group health plan? The truth is, I don't know, and I don't think the legal precedent knows yet how that works. This is all that new. So yeah, and the EEOC doesn't know either. So number two, employees have to have the opportunity to qualify for whatever the incentive is, whatever the reward is, once per year. It's important because to me, this means it's an annual program. It's not every 6 months, 9 months, or 15 months. It's annual. And number three, you have to have and communicate alternate ways to qualify for the incentive. Let's say you can't meet the whatever the standard is, there's got to be an alternate way to reach it. So at WellSteps, we developed a really clever way to manage the alternate requirements on an individual basis. And we do it in a way that prevents the employee's colleagues from ever knowing what that is. So that protects them. It's really, really slick, and it's very simple. All right, 4 through 8. Health contingent rules also apply to participatory programs that include health risk appraisals or biometric screens. And some of you who know the ACA rules really carefully, maybe you're going, oh, this is not true. Yes, it is. In terms of the interesting exchange with a woman by email not long ago when we talked about this in a similar way, and I just said, look, here's the page it's on, and here's where it's explained. Yeah, the rules apply to participatory programs if an HRA or biometric screen is included somehow, even if it's just sort of something you can do. So a reward must be available to all similarly situated employees, which means if you offer it to all full-time employees, or you offer it to a group of full-time employees, all other full-time employees also have to have availability to earn the reward. Number 6, can't deny or limit coverage for non-participants. Now, a denial of coverage is what triggered 2 of the 3 lawsuits that I mentioned. Limiting coverage clearly does not mean that you can't have 2 levels of health insurance, because that's very common with premium differentials, right? I think it has more to do with the reaction to the company that required non-compliant employees to pay so much. Again, watch for legal precedent to clear up the exact ranges of difference. There's got to be a level at which a voluntary program is no longer voluntary, and I think that's a lot of what these rules are trying to kind of clear up. All right, number 7, if medical information is collected, a notice has to be provided. There are specific elements that must be included in the communication. There's like 4 or 5, and again, if you're interested in those things, I can send them to you, but you can also find those in the rules. It gets pretty long to kind of go over that. Same thing with data security rules. There's rules about protection against breach and some other things like that. That gets pretty complicated. There's about 5 rules on data security. So if you want those, I can email those to you as well. And the most important ones are these. These are ones that people talk about a lot. So number 9 is the health contingent rules limit the value of a reward. So up to 30% of employee-only coverage. Now, as I read the rules, this means that the cost of coverage is equal to what the employer pays plus what the employee pays, but it's only for the employee-only value of coverage. This way, a single person with no dependents and the man or woman who's married with children would be on a level playing field. They'd pay the same amount. So again, it's only for employee-only coverage. That's the dollar value they use. The truth is, so example, the total cost of employee-only coverage is 10 grand. Just use an even number. No matter who pays what, the employee or the employer, the reward must be $3,000 or less. Generally, actually 100% of the time, I've never seen a problem with an incentive because nobody's giving away 3 grand. It's just not happened. It's on the penalty side where we have seen problems because for the EEOC and the Affordable Care Act, whether you are withholding 3 grand or giving 3 grand to them, it's all the same. So Tobacco cessation incentive, 50% when tobacco use is self-reported. This is the same as the Affordable Care Act rules. But the last one is unique to the EEOC iteration. It says that when any screen or medical test is used, the max allowable incentive is 30%, not 50%. So when there's a test for nicotine, you got people spitting in a cup or doing serum cotinine, then the incentive max rolls back to 30%. That's an important addition to the EEOC rules. And last and most importantly of all is health contingent rules have to be reasonably designed to promote health or prevent disease. Another way of saying this is, again, like I said before, when do incentives offered or penalties imposed under a wellness program render participation involuntary, right? Make it so that the employee can't afford not to participate. So in this context, reasonably designed means the program can't take too much time of the employee, it can't require intrusive procedures, and it can't place significant costs on the employee. Those three things. Promoting health or preventing disease means the evidence has to be there, which is an interesting thing to me about the Penn State case, because to be honest with you, they required an HRA, which by itself is one of the least effective interventions that we have. In a review published in the American Journal of Health Promotion, it scored 1 out of 5, with 1 being the least effective. That's been well documented in other places as well. So anyway, so the program has to be reasonably designed to promote health. So that said, why all this matters? Let me just go over this really quickly. Why all of this discussion about health contingent stuff matters. Medical costs are going up, and they're projected to go up even more. The goal of any wellness program is to reduce employee costs. I would say that's a goal for most companies. As we've been doing WellSteps all these years, and we've talked to people in implementation meetings, we always ask them what their objectives are, and this comes up nearly all the time. I can think of maybe one time when they said to change the culture, that cost wasn't a factor. And obviously, improving employee health is one really good way to achieve that objective. I just would remind you, though, that employee-related costs in this case is much, much broader than just healthcare costs. It includes productivity, absenteeism, morale, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of these influence and are influenced by the work culture. So there is no question all of them have financial implications. So here's a good question. What's driving costs? Well, the main driver of cost, you've heard us say before, is chronic disease. There's absolutely no question about this. So for example, diabetes. The number of adults with diabetes has quadrupled in just 3 decades. 9.3% of Americans have diabetes. It causes about 200,000 deaths a year, making it the 7th leading cause of death. And worse, about 1 in 3 US adults are pre-diabetic. This is a great example of chronic disease. Hypertension, stroke, cardiovascular disease, those are other examples. So chronic disease drives healthcare costs. What drives chronic disease? Another great question. Risk factors like high blood glucose, triglycerides, cholesterol, high blood pressure are really what drive chronic disease. It flow downhill into the pool. And there's absolutely no question from evidence that's been published that healthy behaviors are what drive risk factors, things like poor dietary habits, inactivity, and tobacco use. Most health contingent programs use risk factors, many of which are biometric variables as a health contingent criteria. I think some of these programs might not go far enough to help employees change behavior. They're not seeing the big picture here and change the health culture, which ultimately drive the risk. So I would caution, beware the seductive potion that all you need for a health contingent program is health contingent standards. A lot of people clap their hands together, dust it off, and say, good, we've got standards. We don't need to do anything else. Well, what about the tools and skills? Remember that statement in Rule 10, reasonably designed to promote health or prevent disease. How do you do that? As a quick review, effective wellness programs we have found over and over again do these 2 things really, really well. They extend reach, and they have impact when they get there. They extend reach to as many employees as possible, the program that moves the needle. program that has impact. So let's talk about reach just a little bit. The goal in any program should be to reach as many employees as you possibly can to help them either adopt or maintain healthy behaviors. But you can't get that kind of reach when you do this. Did you get the idea? So with the program designed to do that, you're going to reach high risk costs, focus on them, but then that limits reach. So nobody else gets any help. The approach can be effective and has shown to be effective, but only in a small portion of the population that is targeted. So sometimes approaches like this get reported with enthusiasm in the literature. Maybe you've seen a paper like this, right? So let me just show you an example of one. Here's a study that was published in 2010. These researchers adjusted for pre-existing differences, because you can see if you look at the graph, the non-participants in red and the participants in blue, there's obviously a difference in their healthcare spend. So that difference was adjusted. They are also adjusted for sex, baseline age, baseline illness, etc., and so on. So, and just in case you're wondering, they use something called propensity score matching, which is just a way of matching participants in the treatment group, the participants in the program, and the control group, the non-participants, based on a cluster of pre-existing factors, so that it seemed like one got a treatment and one didn't. That's called propensity score matching. So what happened in this study is that there was a savings of $300 after all that adjustment. There was a savings of $350 per participant, and this was celebrated with much whoop-de-doo. But here's the rest of the story, and it's great. It's great that did that. But here was the reach. There was an average reach of about 7% per year. In other words, 7% of the participants in the 4 years of the study actually participated, on average, about 7%. The highest year, I think, was 7.7%. Over the course of 4 years, only 1.1% of the participants managed to participate. So the results were good, but you take 1% of the population, you multiply that by the $350 they saved, not having a great impact. Because why? The reach was limited. Just imagine if the reach had been greater. There's one other problem with this, with the kind of traditional disease management approach of just targeting the high risk, high cost. So it's called risk migration. Let's call it that. So here in this slide, we've got 10 participants, each in the high, the medium, and the low risk groups at baseline. Watch what happens to the high risk participants at follow-up. Those are the red ones. So you have some stayed high risk and some migrated to lower levels of risk. Well, it works in the inverse as well. I will say there are several reasons why migration can occur. And some of them may have nothing to do with the intervention, but whatever. There will be migration. Now watch what happens with the medium and low risk groups by follow-up. Keep a special eye on the high risk group at follow-up. This may not be accurate, but what this illustrates is that the high risk are approximately 60% new every year. So you take your high risk, some of them are going to move out. The group that is high risk every year is going to be about 60% new. That means if you don't focus on the whole population, you're never ever going to get ahead. So where did this come from? Researchers at Staywell demonstrated this. They had a study that included about 51,000 employees from multiple employers, and they were followed for 5 years. And specifically, they were interested to know what happened to the highest cost 15%, who generated about 85% of the healthcare costs. And they were 59% new every year. But interestingly, the highest cost 5%, which is who usually gets targeted in a program like this, they were 78% new every year. So there's even more churn at the highest level. What's the moral of the story? Well, the moral of the story is if you focus on the high risk only, you'll be swimming upstream. So let's contrast this with a case study of an effective customer. Here's the case study. Steve presented this in June, but I just want to review really quickly. The long-term effects, this is the projected healthcare costs. Now, this customer is a large school district in the Western United States. And based on data from the Kaiser Family Foundation, here are the projected healthcare costs for a similarly sized organization in that region, or comparable data. And here are the past and projected trends of this customer. This is where they were headed if they did nothing. So you can see they're a little bit lower, but they still were going up at kind of at the same clip. The WellSteps Wellness Program started right here, and here's what happened to their healthcare trend. This is from actual data. Very, very interesting. So this is, again, was their trend. Wellness started right there. Here's what they actually spent. This is pretty phenomenal. And I would say that note that the costs in 2009 and 2014 were nearly identical, and that just doesn't happen. It does not happen. If you want to know more, I suggest you go to our webinars page. Watch Dr. Aldana's entire presentation from June 2015. If you haven't already, it would be highly worth it. Just to close this out, here's what they spent, about 1.4 million. Here's what they saved, about 5 million. Their ROI was about 3.6. This is involved in the peer review process as we speak. But you might ask, what about high risk? Okay, so this is a population-based approach. This is a group that did everything right. I'm going to share with you some of their secret sauce here in a minute. So what happened to the high risk? Well, here's a snapshot of what happened. At baseline, these were for the high risk. This was a average systolic blood pressure, diastolic blood pressure, and glucose. After the intervention, there was a 3.5 to 9.5% reduction in these three variables. Cholesterol also decreased by about 5%. And their reach was extraordinary, up to 94%. So what did they do to improve reach? Well, here's what they did. We have learned from the evidence that if you just throw stuff against the wall to see what sticks, you get about 20% participation, 19% or so. Add participation, you can almost get to 50%. But here's what this customer did exceptionally well with our help. So they had a representative wellness committee that was given the chance to voice input. It was like they went out to their constituents, they got feedback. I know it didn't work perfectly in every case, but there was significant opportunities for input from the employees. Committee membership was rotated regularly. I'm not really sure how often, but that way nobody was saddled with the long-term responsibility to be on the wellness committee. I would say that most of the wellness committee members were vocal supporters and were active participants in the program. We always recommend, when we talk to people, by the way, we say get Tiggers instead of Eeyores. It tends to make a really big difference. And we help them develop a really good, and we help them execute a communication plan. Right, so they had fantastic committee support, and they did a great job communicating the program consistently throughout the year. That got an additional about 20%, 19% or so. They also had, from the very beginning, a benefits-based strategy. They tied participation to benefits, but they used a carrot approach. And I will say their employees love the wellness program. There have been numerous personal success stories. And to be honest, one of our biggest challenges with this customer is to figure out how to adequately challenge some of their healthier participants. They tell us our wellness stuff is too easy. So we're working on that right now. So this customer reached 94% participation. And that's nearly everybody, right? So, and of the people who participated, about 9 of 10 said, I changed at least one behavior. Why did all this happen? Well, we attribute the effectiveness of these two pieces to great leadership support. There was mostly leadership support in their company, but there was really good leadership support by their committee and by her direct bosses. This is what they did to improve reach. So you might ask, what is in the secret sauce? You keep talking about that. This is to create impact. How do you create impact? Now, I'm going to give you a commercial message really quickly. In preparing this and this presentation and kind of working through the health contingent program that we're developing at WellSteps, some tools that are really cool. What we discovered is that there's a high degree of similarity in health contingent programs and disease management programs. And this was confusing, I will say, for both of the people who are helping on the webinar today, but it's absolutely true, because the program coordinator has to choose diseases or risks on which to focus. You can't focus on everything. There has to be measurement and tracking of employee health status. There has to be tools and support provided to help employees improve health. There should be, at least. There has to be a way for employees who are in the disease management program or the health contingent program to graduate, to move from the disease management program or what have you to the healthy group. And there has to be a really good way to communicate and program based on that health status. So our webinar next month is making wellness even better with disease management. I'm going to present that one as well. That's your commercial message. So here's the secret sauce. I'm going to go over each one of these. We've got about 10 minutes or so. I'm going to go over each of these and we'll have time for questions. Here's what you've been waiting for. All right, so the communication plan. The leadership team needs to be unified. We ask the leadership team have a meeting and to kind of get together on the same page. They present a unified front. Employees need to hear from their key senior leader a strong message that says, we want to help you. And again, in a toxic environment, that wouldn't go over well. But if there's any element of trust, which there usually is, that will go a long way. Now, we want to penalize you, we want to help you. There should be promises of more information about the program and an introduction or empowerment of the coordinator. You're going to hear from insert name of coordinator. He or she is going to share with you more information. There's going to be a web page, yada, yada, yada. So the coordinator can communicate via email, a web page we propose to put together describing the details and elements of the program, flyers, posters, webinars, videos, focus groups, whatever means might be necessary. That all gets done so we have employee input. Coordinator communicates with employees regarding all the details. Third, the committee has to decide what requirements to include. What we've done is we've developed a worksheet. And we've developed a system with input from many colleagues that allows the committee and the coordinator max flexibility to choose a disease or risk factors, because they're going to be different depending on the region and depending on the company. Also allows the flexibility to tweak the program criteria. So if your big concern is cardiovascular fitness, for example, then you might use a blood pressure of 140/90. But if it's metabolic syndrome, then your blood pressure you might use is 130/85. So that has to be tweakable, has to be variable. And then thirdly, there has to be the ability to add a percent improvement goal that can be met in lieu of meeting the program criteria for years 2 and beyond. So maybe you've got a body mass index, or you've got somebody with a body mass index of 40. And the goal, the criterion that you came up with is just arbitrarily 27.5. I just pulled that number out of the air. So maybe in 1 year you can't get from 40 to 27.5, but you can get down to 35. So maybe you're not, you haven't met the criterion, but you're showing signs of improvement. That's very important. We want to reward people for moving the correct direction. Now, since I just mentioned BMI, let me just insert a word here about obesity-related measurements. About 90% of health contingent programs use an obesity measurement as a requirement. So that's like body mass or waist to hip ratio or body fat. If you do, I will say BMI, in my opinion, BMI and or circumference measurements are perfectly fine. The United States Preventive Services Task Force screening guidelines, the CDC Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System, the Framingham, and the Nurses' Health Studies, etc., and every checkup I have ever attended have all used height and weight to calculate BMI. I think it's good enough. Now, it's true that BMI can be inaccurate in rare situations where you got somebody who's buff, or in very, very rare cases where people have large bones. But these are exceptions that can be explained to the participant, and I don't really think it's that big of a deal. So we have and fully support customers who use body mass index or similar, but this is what we mostly recommend. We say, look, if you're going to do this, use blood pressure, because blood pressure is a primary risk factor for 3 of the major chronic diseases: heart disease, diabetes, and stroke. It's caused by obesity and tobacco use. It's easy to measure. with inexpensive equipment that just about anyone can be trained to use. Now, you could say the same for BMI, but here's the problem with BMI. BMI is what you are. High blood pressure is what you have. That's why I recommend to most people that they use blood pressure, because it keeps you from interacting with people in a negative way. Again, remember, you're dealing with teenagers. Employees don't like to be told what to do. They don't like to lose privileges. Maybe the employee does need some tough love, get some tough love people out there, but telling someone they're large when they already know it, I'm not sure how that scores in the morale department. Anyway, you get the idea. So also 2/3 of the people in the U.S. either have high blood pressure or borderline high blood pressure. Many of them don't know it. It's, as I mentioned, highly effective and cheap. In that review I mentioned, high blood pressure screening scored a 5 out of 5 in terms of effectiveness. And that was the only intervention out of 13 evaluated that did. And the cure for high blood pressure is diet, exercise, and no tobacco. All of those things should be emphasized in a wellness program. So again, this is my pulpit here. I'm a big proponent of blood pressure. Benefit plan carrot. Let's talk a little bit about that, because the leadership team has to recommend what exactly gets used. So quick refresher on everything we know about behavioral economics. Whether it's an incentive or penalty, now is more powerful than future. What you do now, what you get now, we are creatures of immediate gratification. We want stuff now, right? So it's more powerful to have a motivator that's close rather than kind of in the future. So how does that apply? Well, it applies based on the incentive you choose. So some of you are going to be frustrated that I'm not going to provide more specific information about this, but here, there are basically two ways to do this. One is with the premium differential, which is immediate. You get a monthly premium discount every month, and it's tangible. You can see it on your paycheck, but it's more complicated to administer because the HR people, the benefits people, the payroll people, some or all of those people has to be involved, and that makes things more complicated to administer. Remember, immediate is good if you're trying to influence employee decision making. But you have to balance that against the administrative complexity. I will say this, if you're using money that you collect from the non-compliant to run your wellness program, and some people are, the evidence shows that there is a lot more money available to you if you make plan design changes. If you don't believe me, just check we have a wellness budget calculator on the WellSteps webpage. It's a free tool. And we were actually shocked by this discovery as well. We got data from about 12 national carriers, and we were shocked to find that you can actually save a lot more money by making some simple plan design changes. The benefit plan strategy is better and simpler, but you need some more immediate carrots integrated into the program. That keeps things fun, and this is what we do with our program. We recommend that most people use a plan design strategy, or maybe a combination, and then we offer little carrots along the way. You got to remember that either approach requires someone to collect the data, so you know who did and who did not qualify. And this raises a point of how employees will know when they've achieved the program standards, because I can tell you from experience, they're going to ask you a lot. We'll show you how we communicate this in just a bit. Just one last thing about this before we kind of move on to the next point. We got to remember that benefits-based incentive is still not enough. There's got to be tools and skills. It has to be tools and skills to help employees adopt and maintain behaviors. Okay, secondly is align with disease management. As I mentioned, there's some huge similarities. What do I mean? Well, I shared with you the similarities earlier. Let me just show you a process that we recommend. So step one, identify employees with chronic disease so that they can be assigned to a group to get special communication and programming. It's just like tutoring. Step two, have screening. Step three, identify the group that's healthy. Whatever your criterion are, you're in a healthy group. Congratulations. And then there are going to be some that will need to also adopt and maintain healthy behaviors. Plus, they'll also need whatever communication is received by those who already have the disease. For all intents and purposes, the people who are at borderline risk, who are pre-diabetic, and the people who are diabetic, they need to basically do the same things. The lifestyle prescription for them is the exact same. So this is what I mean when I say aligning with disease management. So that's super important. All right, number 3 is leverage existing assets. Here's what we've learned. A health contingent program is never, ever, ever one size fits all. Even if you're in one state, you're a broker or consultant for one state, you'll recognize that what gets done at one company is going to be different than another company. There's immense variation by region, by business type, that has to be allowed. And we've tried to do that with the way we've designed our system to allow maximum flexibility. I wanted to share with you a few examples of how we are doing this with some WellSteps customers. So we work with a university system. It has a researcher trained to deliver a 6-week lifestyle change model. We thought, well, that's great. Trained through Stanford. It's this person is prepared to evaluate its efficacy, and they want to do research. Why not use her talents? Let's leverage that existing asset. We work with a hospital system who has employees who employs an awesome health coach. Awesome. And she's willing to put together a lifestyle change class. We talked about this yesterday. That we may or may not support with some of our 2-week challenges, just depending on what they tell us. When you go to class, you learn about physical activity, how important it is, and your homework is to participate in a 2-week challenge to promote physical activity. You go to a class, you learn about eating healthy. Then you have your 2-week challenges to prepare healthy meals at home with this challenge and some of the tools and resources. So then we also offer to possibly augment what they're doing with some specific webinars. So, but I say, man, let's leverage the skills and the talents of that educated health coach. So this is a consulting approach to solving health contingent problem. Here are just a few other quick examples of how we've leveraged some of our IT assets. I'm just going to show you a few. So I've talked about this before, but so in many cases, biometric data winds up being pretty important. We've developed a way to upload data and have it, either before or after the PHA, or personal health assessment, is taken. If it's before, the user can't take the question, it's kind of grayed out, but they get a little message that says, hey, this question's been answered for you, your blood pressure was here. So that the employee gets reminded of what their biometric value is, and then the wellness team sees objective data for planning and reporting. So that's one way of leveraging existing assets. Another way is so just the feedback is theory based, and it's they get a health report card, right, that tells them how they're doing, what things that they need to improve, and then they get support with the tool that helps them set and achieve goals, 21-day goals. And then finally, based on age, gender, and how they've answered the responses on the personal health assessment, there's an algorithm that's based on screening and counseling guidelines from the United States Preventive Services Task Force. It gets run, and then individual screening recommendations are provided. There's even a spot for the physician to sign down there. And then the employees can take a picture of this with their smartphone. They can upload a pic, other document. They can scan a document. They can upload it either online or via our app. So fourth, answer employee questions, and I'll tell you what those two are, to allow employees to graduate to healthy status. So what we found is there are two main questions. Am I done? What do I need to do if I'm not? That's pretty much it. So we developed a feature we call Wellness Plan. You can name it whatever you want. We can call it the premium plan. We just call it Wellness Plan by default. But if the employee clicks on that, it tells them what they've done. You've done the personal health assessment. You've done the flu shot, but you got a couple of other things to do. You can click here to find out exactly where else you need to go, and on a customer by customer basis, we can change that message. So we can say, here's the phone number, here's what to do, how to schedule, who to call, etc., and so on. So the second piece is just really quickly I want to show you how the employee can graduate from the group that gets the special intervention and programming. Remember, they're getting the same interventions and programs as everyone else, but they get special help. It's like tutoring. So during a year, employee can graduate out of the group at any time when they meet the program criteria or the alternate standard. Boom, they go back to the healthy population. We made it very, very easy to verify the employees really did what they said they did, so they can graduate. And I'll mention this a bit more when I kind of talk about reporting, but at a high level, here's how we automated the tracking process. Um, we created a way to track using our rewards activity system that we built from scratch. We built from scratch for every customer. So again, the employee submits proof of completion, a proof gets verified for any number of health contingent program criteria, and then the employee graduates to the healthy population automatically. That little flag in the wellness plan I showed you, it gets flipped up so they see that they're done, and they don't send you an email or call you and ask you whether or not they met the criterion. So then the last piece is just to close this out is to evaluate and report. So the coordinator can already see these things, the first 5 things that you see based on other things. The first 4 changes in behavior and risk and so forth are all prominently featured in our aggregate report, which is available 24/7 in real time to coordinators, but they can also see testimonials provided from our campaigns. We provide those as each behavior change campaign is concluded. They will be able to see success stories from a new tool that we're rolling out called My Story. People can say, I did this and it worked great. Other people in the company can see those stories. So they get that qualitative feedback. But there's also real-time tracking of program graduates. That's really cool. You get an updated coordinator will be able to see on a rolling basis how many people are in the needs extra help category, but they also get updated in real time when people move from unhealthy to the healthy population again. So they're able to say at any time we've had 60 people move. This is the great news. And then we just make it a point to talk to the coordinator at the end of the program to discuss evaluation opportunities. So I have actually used most of my allotted time. We have maybe time for a few questions. I want to thank you wholeheartedly. This is a picture of Bryce Canyon where my family and I visited here really recently. We'll take some questions and remind you about our next webinar that you can register for right now. So Steve, we may have time for 1 or 2 questions.
Thanks, Troy. A quick question. Eugene wants to know if a contribution to an HSA from an employer counts as part of their employee healthcare cost calculated in with the incentives. I actually don't know the answer to the question, nor have I seen anywhere where someone has addressed that. But do you know anything about that?
I can't say definitively that I do, but my guess is based on everything I've read and seen, the answer would be no. That an employer contribution to an HSA does not count as part of the healthcare costs in that calculation.
Now, maybe unless it gets spent or used for qualified expenses, then somehow then it would be, but that's tougher to track.
Yeah, and that's not the question you asked. So it would count as against the 30% limit, the incentive limit. If I contribute, so.
So you're saying an HSA contribution from my employer to my HSA counts towards my 30% limit?
That would be my guess.
Yeah. Okay, I haven't seen any definitive answer yet. Maybe we don't have an answer.
I don't think there is.
We have a question here regarding the use of which activities to put in a health contingent program do we see most often? Biometric screening, health risk appraisal, campaigns, playing program participation. I mean, what's kind of the most common description, the most common setup we see?
Well, I think a lot of times people use biometric measures because they're objective, but the case study that I shared with you earlier, one of the things I included was participation in a WellSteps behavior change campaign because they understood how important it was to help employees adopt and maintain healthy behaviors with tools and skills. So they included not only the biometrics, but also some required participation in, and then let the employees choose a campaign to participate in. They could participate in any one of 4.
Now, Lisa has a question about non-U.S. settings. How does this change if we go outside the U.S.?
Well, this is a U.S. law. So as far as I know, it only really applies to the United States. And the EEOC, ADA, ACA, that's all pretty much. But my guess is a Canadian system is probably very similar. In fact, if anything, it's more aggressive.
Okay. We got a few other questions we're going to respond to offline, Troy, but thank you so much for your work today. We want to welcome everybody and invite everybody next month to see how disease management fits into all of this and wish everybody to have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.